Mr. George Galloway.
Or heard such tosh, Mr. Speaker. This House of Commons continued its adversarial, bear pit, unarmed political combat throughout the darkest days of the Second World War. Mr. Churchill didn't ask for Parliament to be silenced, for confrontations across the House to be forbidden, when our soldiers were being laid waste in the Norway debate. The House of Commons rose perhaps to its finest 20th century moment. Nobody said our armed forces have suffered a disaster. The House of Commons cannot meet. The clash of ideas cannot be heard. We must muffle the drums and silence ourselves. At Dunkirk, the House clashed without pause. Real war leaders, like Mr. Churchill, understood that the whole point of us being here, the whole point of democracy, the whole point of elections, is that we do not suspend normal political activity. Happily, I have a lot to say, and I may take some time to say it.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. He's missed the rather important point that between 1939 and 1945, general elections were suspended. So democracy was suspended during the war, and his history is faulty.
Actually, there were many by-elections, some of them producing spectacular results, as spectacular as the one in Bradford West just over a year ago. But in any case, is anyone suggesting that an Iron Bevan didn't stand on these benches, lacerating real war leaders about their conduct of the war? The honourable gentleman is a scholar and a gentleman. He knows very well the words of Mr. Amory from his side at that darkest hour in the Norway debate, which brought about the defenestration of the Prime Minister and the coming to office of Mr. Churchill, about whom much more later. We did not suspend our democracy in our darkest hours. Why are we suspending it now? It was said from one of the ironclad consensus on the front benches that this was a national funeral. I'm sorry, but it is not a national funeral. You can only have a national funeral where there is a national consensus about the person being buried. And that consensus does not exist in relation to Mrs. Thatcher. And no matter how oft people from the front benches fawn upon her, pour honeyed words upon her, even outside of this house, of course, tell lies about her and her record, that won't change. And the British establishment is making a profound misjudgment here. And the opposition parties, in particular, are making a profound misjudgment. If they imagine that there are not tens of millions of people in the country, all of whom have votes, who are very angry about a whole range of issues that have arisen. And I hope to adumbrate some of them in relation to this motion this evening, Mr. Speaker, with your permission. If I was to speak shortly, it would be that great New York phrase, enough already. We've had enough of this. It's gone on too long, and it's gone too far. And this puts the tin hat on it. The idea that we should suspend a vital part of our democratic process for a party political and private funeral. Don't get me wrong, I won't be demonstrating at the funeral tomorrow. I believe it's wrong to demonstrate at someone's funeral. But I will not agree to suspend our democracy so that some of the friends of the deceased have to make a choice between attending Prime Minister's Question Time or going to the funeral. And that's a choice that's up to them to make. And of course, it's very clear that they could do both, though they would have tender sensibilities, though they may have, to come into the bear pit immediately on their return to the House. But then that's what they're here for. That's what they were elected to be here for. Harold Wilson, who won 4 general elections and didn't receive a scintilla of the treatment which the British establishment has rolled out for the deceased on this occasion, said that a week was a long time in politics. And this week has been a very long time. We were told at the beginning of the week that it was disrespectful to speak of someone so recently dead. I was told on the BBC yesterday I should hold my peace until Thursday. How much national mourning, without consensus and without justification, are we supposed to observe? You know, Mr. Speaker, how much personal respect I have for you, and so I hope you will accept from me that I mean nothing personal in this point at all. But the decision to muffle Big Ben just after the BBC had muffled Ding Dong summed the whole thing up. It has become farcical. There is no national consensus around the deceased. There was no justification for muffling Big Ben, because that puts the deceased on a par with Mr. Churchill, a very divisive politician. My grandparents helped overturn his car after the count in Dundee in the 1930s, when he was thrown out of Parliament in the city. He vowed, I will.
I wish to correct the gentleman. Winston Churchill, then a Liberal MP, was ejected from Dundee in 1922. He served from 1908 to 1922.
Well, it's a very important qualification. He was.
Wish the honourable gentleman to be led away from the path of virtue, that the point may be of interest to scholars, but it is at best tangential to the sittings of the House motion. Mr. George Galloway.
As would have been what I was going to say about Neddy Scrimgeour, the great temperance MP, a man who was Mr. Churchill's partner in the two-member constituency at that time.